In Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. He wears the halo because he's really just a personification of the actual Son. I tell my Christian friends all the time, and I don't mean any harm when I say this, but we can argue whether or not Jesus is the Son of God, but we can walk outside every day and literally see the Son of the Creator. That one would be a fact that none of us could argue with, but I digress. My point is that Jesus is a personification of the Son, which is at the center of the modern heliocentric universe today. And we see the history of that coming forth by the Roman Catholic Church and Thomas Aquinas around 1270. And we move on up into 1453 when Gutenberg developed the printing press and Bibles were mass produced. And I think the first Bible was the Septuagint Bible because 7, again, is dealing with the number of completion. Again, there were 7 wandering stars that everyone knew about, and they tracked time with this system during that time. So when you look at the first Bibles, they was just calendars or numerology books, all surrounding the numerology of 7. 7, Sabbath. So the 7th day of the week was always known to be Saturday, or if you look at this Ptolemaic universe, this geocentric depiction, you can see that the 7th wandering star on this model is Saturn. Now, we know the Earth isn't a ball, but the 7 wandering stars were always in this order, but the Earth was enclosed. And the Earth was depicted as a plane, but the 7th wandering star was Saturn. So Saturn or Saturday is the Sabbath day. The number 7 translates to Septos. And this is how we get the month of September, which should have been the 7th month. But of course, the calendars were being altered during this time as well to change this cosmology to the modern concept that we have today. So that was a journey. A lot of Kemetic people accept today's model, but our ancient Kemetic ancestors did not accept today's model because they didn't even have months like July and August that would be necessary to go along with the accepted model. What we all must keep in mind is, as I told you in the very beginning, in 300 BC was the time of Plato and Aristotle's geocentric theory. But what you also must keep in mind is that 300 BC, what was going on in Egypt, it was the year of the pre-Julian Roman calendar. At the time, it was known as the year of the consulship of Corvus and Pansa. The denomination 300 BC for this year has been used since the early medieval period when the Anno Domini calendar era became the prevalent method in Europe for naming years. BCE is the abbreviation for before the common, current, or Christian era, and that's just an alternative to before Christ because all cultures don't acknowledge Christ. Also, Anno Domini translates to year of our Lord, and the reason they call this the year of their Lord because this was the year when they conquered Egypt under their lords and their cosmology. They even have a movie called 300 dealing with this event. The earliest form of geocentrism, as I said earlier, has us enclosed in the archdome on a stationary earth plane. And the next form of geocentrism would be the Aristotle and Plato model under Ptolemy. But one thing we want to keep in mind is geocentrism simply means earth-centered cosmology. It doesn't necessarily mean the shape of the earth being flat or round. It just means the earth at the center. So as we move on, we'll see how we move up into today, where we're being told that the sun is at the center of the universe. Remember that Saturday is the Sabbath, and on a geocentric model, you have 7 wandering stars, with Saturday being the last one. Today, we are told that Sunday is the Sabbath. So there's clearly some things off track with the time we are in today. And we all know that the months July and August were added. Keep in mind the concept of the 7 wandering stars and the Earth-centered geocentric model. And think about fields of study such as geometry, which I deal with geometry a lot on this channel, so just explore it. And when we talk sacred geometry or geometry, period, again, we're talking earth-centered studies. And also keep in mind that the word earth means heart, because earth is at the center, according to the ancients. I've proven in so many videos, as well as many other flat earthers, that the earth is just the way the ancients conceived it. I just want to continue the historical timeline and the history of geocentrism leading up to heliocentrism on this particular video. So let's continue. So again, in 1453, Gutenberg developed the printing press after all of these different models and theories were being presented. And after that, in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus came aboard and publishes on the revolution of heavenly spheres. Because Gutenberg had developed that printing press, then Nicholas comes along and publishes on the revolution of heavenly spheres in his last year of his life, which postulates a heliocentric, sun-centered solar system where Earth and planets are revolving around the sun. So this was Nicholas Copernicus, who now came along after the printing press and after Thomas Aquinas had already come with his theory of a God-centered universe. And prior to that, we see the coming out of ancient cosmology into the geocentric models, which took the dome away and balled the earth up and created space. We lead all the way up to 1543. Nicholas Copernicus, in the last year of his life, postulates a heliocentric, sun-centered solar system where Earth and planets are now revolving around the sun. For who would place this lamp of a very beautiful temple in another or better place than this, wherefrom it can illuminate everything at the same time? This was a quote by Nicholas Copernicus, worshiping the sun. Again, this sun-centered model took away the balance, but the balance was taken away the moment Aristotle and Plato created the first model. But I'm just showing you how over time it slowly and surely became what we have today. This Nicholas Copernicus model was the model that many of us was taught in school, but our children today are learning a figure 8 model, in which we'll get into that as well. But we're going to work our way up the timeline. So we're here in 1543. We see Nicholas Copernicus now come with the sun-centered solar system. And in 1580, Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer, claimed the most accurate measurement of planet and stars, yet still was uncertain of a heliocentric or geocentric model, was first to suggest a non-circular orbit of planets. So now we're leading out of the hypnotization spiral style solar system into a more dynamic version where the different planets are in their own circular orbits in different angles. The picture in front of you shows an example of the differences of the two. So over time, they had to develop the math and develop the theories and the lies to make these non-scientific models work. Keeping in mind that for many, many years, when we talk flat earth cosmology, people were finding their way around this earth just fine. They were navigating the seas by the stars, and they were all using Polaris or the North Star to find their way home. This wouldn't have been possible on a globe to look up and navigate by the North Star no matter where you are on the plane. It's because you're on a plane, and because the ancients did this, they knew that they were on a plane. But we can see here now how the deception took place over time. So we move on from 1580, and they go from all of the planets going around a stationary sun in circular orbits, and to now each planet having a circular orbit, but in a different trajectory, a different angle. So it's slowly changing. And in 1582, the Gregorian calendar replaces the Julian calendar by Roman Catholic Church Pope Gregory. We move on to 1609, and Galileo grinds his own glass and makes a telescope, observes Venus' moons going around Venus, and this is so-called proving heliocentrism. So far, what we're reading is how heliocentrism come to be. But what we're not reading is where any scientific experiments took place to prove or disprove these models. It was pure speculation and theory, and this is what we're reading. You can do your own research, prove me wrong. This was during the time of Hellenism or heliocentrism, what we're calling heliocentrism, what we're still in today. We're in hell, or helios. So we're supposed to take Galileo's word as so-called proof of heliocentrism. In 1609, Galileo also publishes his work in Italian so all laymen can read instead of scholar Roman Latin. We move on to 1619, and Johannes Kepler, a German astronomer, student of Tycho Brahe, so-called proved the heliocentric theory by identifying planet orbits as elliptical and not circular. Again, they're still tweaking the movement of the planets because now they've switched the Earth with the sun. You see, it worked perfectly in the ancient geocentric model. But when we moved on to Aristotle and Plato's model, from then on, they've been changing it because they just can never get it right because it's not the truth. We move on from Johannes Kepler and we move on up to 1687, and Sir Isaac Newton, English astronomer and president of the Royal Society of England, stated that the quote-unquote law of universal gravitation, which mathematically showed the force that kept the Earth and planets going around the sun, as well as what kept the oceans in and air from flying away. He also wrote the book quote-unquote Principia Mathematica. Around this time, Isaac Newton was coming up with the theory of gravity. So we're talking about a science that we ended up with today that's based on theory. Remember that the root word of theory is theos, which means God. These are men who exalted the Son as God so that they can personify the Son as a man of worship. Son worship is the worship of the man. As above, so below. It's the worship of the Son, the S-U-N, as well as the worship of the Son, the S-O-N. So Jesus, being the Most High and the light of the world, was another personification of the Son to have everyone caught up into this Hellenistic system. Remember that Thomas Aquinas had already came with the theory of a God-centered universe in the year 1270, and the Roman Catholic Church adopted it. So after that, it was all about coming up with the theoretical dialogue to make all of this stuff make sense in order to indoctrinate us with it. And there was a lot of men that played a part in that. You can see they went from the basic hypnotization spiral style to someone saying, okay, let's change the elliptical orbits. And Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe had a role in that. Sir Isaac Newton come with the theory of gravity to make this thing make sense. And after that, in 1758, Edmund Halley successfully predicted, using Newton equations, the return of a comet that was last seen. And this is just them reprogramming the masses during this time, because remember that the ancients were making successful predictions with their flat earth systems for many, many years. But nevertheless, as we move on, in 1822, the Congregation of the Holy Office removed heliocentric books from the Vatican banned book list. And in 1838, Friedrich Bessel measures quote-unquote stellar parallax method to measure first distance of a star, 61 Cygni. And again, this is now the kind of theoretical science where now you have to believe the scientists as opposed to the ancient system where we all were the scientists. And we had schools that proved to us the true nature of our cosmology. So now we're in a time of the theoretical scientists, which are no different than the pastors. It's all theology and theory based. So we move on to 1915, and another theoretical scientist by the name of Albert Einstein published the general theory of relativity, in which gravity is not a force, but it is a consequence of the curvature of space-time. Okay. And we see just theories built upon theories and no facts. But it was all an attempt to take us away from the ancient truth, which is a fact, a provable fact. None of what we've read so far is factual based. It's all theory based. You have to keep that in mind. Science isn't nothing you believe in. Science is a verb. It's a method. So if the only action you take is believing a so-called scientist, that's not science, that's indoctrination. You have to do your own experiments and research, and you will get the same results many of us flat earthers got. And that's that the ground you walking on is flat, and that the ancients were right. So the idea of a flat plane domed by a firmament was common in quote-unquote pre-scientific societies. So anything associated with the era when everyone on Earth had this conception of a flat Earth cosmology, they teach us to call it pre-scientific today. When you go and research pre-dynastic time, or the time before dynasties ruled over man, you will see that the people were more in tune with nature, but somewhere along the way we were able to be deceived, and I'm just giving you the history of that deception. So the idea of a spherical earth appeared in Greek philosophy, also with Pythagoras around 6th century BC. Again, Aristotle played a great role in providing so-called evidence for the spherical shape of the earth by around 330 BC. And knowledge of the spherical earth gradually began to spread beyond the Hellenistic world from then on. From as far back as man has records into the age of enlightenment, science and philosophy taught the earth was the center of the universe, with the exception of Aristarchus in 310 to 230 BC, who was said to be the first to propose a sun-centered universe, as we went over. And Plato and Aristotle in 300 BC postulated that the earth was a sphere, but still a geocentric, earth-centered universe. And I went over that earlier, how they removed the covenant or the arch dome in science and balled the earth up and created space in between man and the Most High. Claudius Ptolemy in 85 to 165 AD of Alexandria devised a complex system of quote-unquote epicycles to account for planets that appeared to go backward or in retrograde. The Bible taught that the earth had 4 corners and was flat, a plane. Thomas Aquinas, as the Roman Catholic Church was coming to power, stated famously the heavens were God-ordained and man-centered. And that's how we get thrusted into today's man's world, because you have to remember that the ancient flat earth conceptions are also matriarchal concepts.